Thank you, Amanda. And I'm going to plant a question first. I want you to all think about trees you have known and why they're special to you. And if we have time, we'll actually highlight it, but we'll get back to that. So that's just something for you to ruminate on. And I just want to say, let's continue the love fest, because I do love the Morean. The Morean is where my art journey started. I mean, I had done art as a hobby, but my serious art journey started here. I took a couple of printmaking classes here, and in fact, one of my teachers was a former fresh squeezed artist. I think maybe the first year, but Barry Goodman was my teacher, and he was phenomenal, got me really hooked on printmaking. And I heard about fresh squeeze probably about 5 or 6 years ago and loved the idea, and just sort of thought, well, that would be really nice if I could be a fresh squeezed artist. And it never occurred to me, well, it did a little, but I had never really expected it to happen. And so when it happened, and Lynn works in the same studio group with me, and so she knew that this was a major goal for me. And so being here is just, it's phenomenal. I haven't stopped pinching myself. It's highly competitive. I didn't realize how competitive and how prestigious it really is. So being part of this group is just an astonishing honor. And then to be able to get closer to Amanda and get to know her team with Chris and other people, it's just been a real privilege. And so, and in spite of all of that, you guys have made me feel like I'm doing you a favor. So it's the way you treat your artists, the way you bring us along, the way you connect us to the community, and what you do to connect the community to art is just a very cool thing. So congratulations and thank you for that. This is my first piece that I ever entered into a show, of course, at the Morean. It was a member show, and I got an honorable mention. It's I Am the Ibis. For those of you, you might have heard sort of shades of the Beatles in that, but it is, the honorable mention was all the encouragement I ever needed to say, okay, it's time for me to retire from my 40-year career as a corporate operations executive and move into art making. So let's do that. So that's what I did. And let's see how this goes. Yes. So what's printmaking? Let's talk a little bit about that. We have somebody who could probably correct everything I'm going to tell you right here. But it's, before I start, how many of you besides you and Rachel have actually, and Stella, have actually done any printmaking? Great. Okay. So just know that printmakers do everything painters do, only we do it backwards and under pressure. Meaning that what we do is we start with a plate, and I brought a few to share, to you know, send around. But basically we have a plate, and you can, it can be a plain plate that you just ink and you paint on like you do, only use ink. And then you have, or you can carve it, or you can etch it. And basically, the image is here. Then you put a piece of paper over it and you run it through the press. This is Patsy, by the way. She's named from my mother. And at 2,500 pounds, she does not exert as much pressure as my mother did. And I say that with all the love and affection I had for my mother. Anyway, so, and so when it comes out of the press, it comes out backwards. So that's what I meant by backwards. And a lot of printmakers do, I'm going to send one of these around. You can start looking at those. A lot of printmakers make additions, multiples. That was the whole idea, right? Is we want to sell, we want art to be more accessible to people, so let's find a way to make more of it more accessible. And so the idea was of multiples were born. And when you make a bunch of these, they're actually individual originals. They're not copies, they're not reproductions. Each piece takes as much human effort as the other. And I don't do that. I make monoprints, which is to say I use a library of these plates that I've carved. This is linoleum block, and I use dry point. Here's another one. This is dry point. This is an intaglio process. Basically, it means you're incising an image into a plate. This is PETG. It's a very soft plastic. And you put the ink on and you smush it into the grooves and wipe a little bit of it off, and you get fine lines. So that's it. That's another thing I do. And basically, but I do them in different combinations and in different colors. So every single thing is an original composition. So I don't work in multiples. And there I go. So this, I'm showing you kind of how it works. Every piece has multiple plates and multiple images all combined. This, I'm going to show you what's in here, is pretty much the same sets of blocks that I used for these two images on the pink wall. And you can see this case, this is a background. I start with the backgrounds. I ink the background. You notice that there was some white imagery on there because I take my linoleum blocks, I run it through the press on top of the background image or plate, and then I pull them apart and it takes the ink away. And that's how I get my whites. You don't use white ink in printmaker, at least I don't. I don't know if you guys do, but I don't. I let the paper give me the white and light that I need. So you can see her going like crazy. This is a case where I have the linoleum blocks face to face, and they create a kind of a texture which you can almost see in this image. You can kind of see, it's not a very good photograph, but you can kind of see some of the other markings in there, and that's because the ink is kind of moving back and forth. And why do I do that? Well, I like to interrupt the image. I don't like to have just a straight graphic impression. I like to see it kind of softened and moved around. Gives it more of an ephemeral look, I think. Here I'm using what is called a la poupée to apply some ink on the giant linoleum block. And then after that, I will start putting it onto paper. And so it's just, once you get all the ink, the plates inking, it usually takes me 2 to 3 days to ink plates for these larger pieces. And then we start printing. As you can see, it's a little physical. I'm doing a lot of running around because I have to adjust the tension. But in the end, that's where the magic happens, is in the layering, because then you're getting the ink combining with itself in different, and it evolves different colors. The light bounces around the layers, and it just gives it some dimension and some depth. And this particular piece that I'm printing in this video is, again, based on many of the similar blocks. It was done for the Community Foundation of Tampa Bay's 35th anniversary. It's a commission. I'm really proud to be part of that. So that was exciting for me to get that offer. And I think Fresco might have had something to do with that. See, where is this going to take me? Yes. So what do I do? My work celebrates the fragile diversity of our natural environment, especially in Florida, and especially trees, or treeness. And where this kind of started was when I grew up in Michigan, a child in Michigan. My father was an entomologist, and he didn't want to cut the trees down around our house. So I was surrounded by woods, and I would go out into the woods and wander around with my imaginary friends, and we'd have all these wonderful conversations with the trees, and the trees would listen to us, and they were very supportive, and they were very sympathetic, and they were just wonderful companions. Sad to say, I did a Google search, and a lot of those trees are gone. They've been replaced by suburban houses. Like 90% of the forests around the world have been deforested, made way for agriculture or urbanization, commodities, or even just as effect of climate change. And so that's kind of the basis for this exhibition. And that's where I got the idea or the notion of future memories of trees not yet lost. That's the theme of this exhibition. The idea that one day, if we don't change the way we value trees, one day we could all find that all we have left of our trees is our memories. And of course, then that would be kind of all we'd have left of ourselves too, because trees do a lot for us. Buddha said a tree is a wondrous thing that shelters, feeds, and protects all living things. It even offers shade to the axemen who destroy it. So my work pays homage to these great and wonderful creatures who do so much for us, and they ask nothing in return but to be left alone to get on with giving us the very air we breathe. I'm going to talk about two pieces in particular. This one is Vanishing Connection. It's over here. And this was a response to a personal experience we had. We came back from a vacation, and a whole acre of land that I passed every day on my commute to my studio was just clear cut. It was just gone. All that was left were these piles of trees that had been yanked up by the roots and just left there waiting, and they were all waiting for, I assume, some ignominious fate like mulching or fuel or something like that. But the whole acre of land, or it was really a little more than that, was just decimated. And so I started working on an idea expressing how I felt with that. One thing about printmaking is when you run a plate through the press and onto the paper, there's always a residual layer of ink left. It doesn't completely come off the plate. And what that is that's the ghost. And so what I was able to do in this case is I printed the red tree, then I just moved the plate over, and I put the paper back down, ran it back through the press, and then I did it 2 more times. And that gave me this sense of vanishing. The other side, and I mentioned putting the linoleum blocks together and pulling the ink away, and that's what I did with the blue side of the press. So you kind of get this sense of a ghost, sort of the haunting the clear-cut land, and then the idea that forests are vanishing. Sorry if that's kind of beating you over the head with symbology, but, and then there were these 2 power utility poles on either side of the lot, which are now connecting to apparently a very much needed convenience store. And so some people think it's more needed than others, I think. So that's what's behind this piece. Oh, I went too far, sorry. Oh well, we'll just leave that up. The other, let's talk about the giant elephant tree in the room. Have any of you read the book, The Overstory by Richard Powers? I highly recommend it. It's kind of a thick one. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning novel. And it's about trees, and it's about humans' relationship to trees, and it's about the future of the earth and how trees affect that. It's a beautifully written book, and it really has sort of guided a lot of my artistic work. And I wanted, when I was applying to Fresqueeze, I knew I needed something dimensional. And I knew I needed to take the trees out of 2D and make them 3D. And so I started working on this, and I started collecting like hangers from my friends. And so this is about 60% recycled material, upcycled, failed prints are stuffed in there, and around the armature, wrapped around the armature. And I even have some shopping bags in there and stuff like that. And then I made some prints on Thai kozo paper, which is a very thin mulberry paper. It's thin, but it's strong. And so I made a bunch of these, and I then cut them up and tore them up and collaged them around the branches and around the canopy, which is actually a PVC material. And then I cut squares of the prints and did a modified Turkish map fold, for those of you who care, and wired it together. I even put some glitter on there, which was probably a mistake. But the name of the sculpture is Still, again, coming from the book, The Overstory. He doesn't really explain the use of that word, so I am free to interpret it in two ways. The first is be still. Live slowly. Expand in your space. Sink deep roots and connect with your community as trees do. The other meaning is we still have time to preserve and conserve our forests. There's about by some estimates, there's about 3 trillion trees left on Earth. That's a lot. But trees do their best works in woodlands and in forests. And like just in the North American continent, there's only about 4% of the forests remaining. So it's dwindling. Forests are dwindling. It's pretty sad, especially in South America, in the Amazon rainforests. Used to be called the lungs of the earth. Well, they are being deforested on a daily basis to the point where they've passed the point where they're actually now expelling more carbon than they're sequestering. The rainforests are. So the way I look at it is we still do have time to change the way we value the living tree. Just thinking about the value of the tree as a living thing instead of putting our value on the land that they stand on and the commodities we can make from them. I'll just say this, I'll give you this one specific quote from The Overstory. When you cut down a tree, what you make from it should be at least as miraculous as what you cut down. So, what's your favorite tree? Do you have a story about a favorite tree? If you don't want to share it here, and I don't know how much time we have, I don't want to cut into Stella's time, but if you do have a tree story, please share it with us on Instagram at Fresh Squeezed Trees. We'd love to hear about them. So, thanks for coming.